the 80s slasher librarian.
Hello, boils and ghouls. Tonight is the conclusion of Tales from the Crypt Demon Night. Hope you've enjoyed my story. And now, Chapter 20. Though it looked like Diamond County Deputy Sheriff Bob Martell had lost supreme command of the freedom fighters to Irene Galvin, he had not lost the whole battle, not by a long shot. Currently, Irene had him slogging around outside in the rain on some kind of search and destroy mission in the yard. After coming down from the steeple, they had checked in all the rooms and found no one, which Martell interpreted as meaning everybody else was dead. But no, Irene insisted that in such a big place as the Mission Inn, there were lots of good hiding places. She did not seem to realize that Breaker was content to blow the whole night cowering in room 5, and apparently Jerry as well. Suddenly, now they were gone. Room 5 was empty, and Uncle Willie had not bothered to come down from the security of the steeple. The smell of death hung in every noseful Martell inhaled, and with every minute that dragged by, it was looking like he and Irene were the sole survivors. But what had enticed Breaker and Jerry out of the room? During the short time Irene and he were gone catching Uncle Willie in what's supposed to be an attic, those two had took off. Were they downstairs now? Were they in the steeple now? Was Breaker a lying son of a bitch? A county official who planned this whole terrible episode just to put a certain deputy to the test, before either firing him or promoting him? Martell's head ached with questions. The undersized field jacket was horrifically tight on him. The rain pounding his head felt like a hail of cold buckshot. He was hungry and needed to see the blood of these demons to renew his warrior's spirit. He had no doubt that he would be killing them all soon, if Irene would ever stop ordering him around like a general. His silly mission now was to circle the building to look for Danny, as if the kid actually made it out here into the rain and decided to hunker down and be miserable all night. And now it seemed like the flashlight wanted to order a midnight snack of new batteries, the once mighty white beam yellowing and getting soft. There was a clump of former hedges at the northwest corner of the building, and Martell dutifully stuck the barrel of his shotgun inside the nest of crumbling branches to pull it apart. What? No Danny curled up inside? The proper authorities would hear of this, especially since the proper authority here consisted of Deputy Martell and no one else. He continued his tour around the building. Someone had left a tattered white t-shirt in the mud. Call the FBI, for Christ's sake. Beyond it, something that looked suspiciously like a dog turd loomed squatly on the ground. The CIA must be told of this. Around the next corner, he ran across a tumbleweed that had become soggy and was unable to tumble anymore. He stomped it into a pile of pointy little twiglets while using a mental clipboard to remind himself to phone the president with this ghastly news. And then he was back at the same kitchen door Irene had forced him out of. She was inside, scooping up wet ashes with a dustpan, looking lumpy and green in her clothes, like a big mutated frog. How he hated her. "Nothing, huh?" she said as he came in. Then, in less than the time it takes a real frog to perform one hop, she popped up on her feet and aimed the dustpan at him. "Hold it right there!" she shouted. He held it right there. What the hell did she want? "Huh? You could be the salesman all over again." "I ain't no salesman," he said. "I'm Bob Martell, and I'm the deputy sheriff. I am the police." She pressed her chin down toward her breastbone, eyeing him fiercely in a classic pose of mistrust. Her single grenade was hooked to the waistband of her slacks, and now one hand went down to touch it. "Prove it," she demanded. Bob Martell spluttered and fumed. "God damn it, Irene, I am who I am." Her eyes grew narrower. "And who might that be?" He propped the shotgun against the wall, quite willing by now to unhook a hand grenade from his new coat and blow her stupid ass and the stupid rest of her off the face of the stupid earth. "Irene," he said in tightly measured words, "with Sheriff Tupper dead, I am the man in charge here. I also have grenades in easy reach. You may think that you're the newest thing since Dairy Queen invented ice cream, but I am here to tell you it ain't so. Got that? She rolled her eyes. So sue me then, Martell. Come on in, Bob. I just had to be sure. He deflated to his normal unangry size. Christ, we need a code word, he complained. He stuck the flashlight into his holster. You call me something, I call you something different. She bent down and resumed collecting wet ashes. Fine. You call me Irene and I call you shit for brains. Not funny, Irene. We'll do it this way. Your code name will be, Frog Lady. Frog Lady? Something the salesman could never know, see? And I'll be, Stupor Man? Nah, he'd guess that right off the bat, wouldn't he? Not funny again. I'll be Gunbelt, how's that? Can you remember it? She nodded. Gumby! No problem. He ground his teeth. Anyhow, Danny's not outside. All right then. Now go check that basement, Martell, Mr. Gumby. He eyed her warily. You want me alone in the basement? Suppose it's still crawling with demons down there. Do you want me dead? Is that it? She thought for a moment. You know, you're right, Gumby. A slow death would be better. He retrieved the shotgun and strode past her. Screw you, he muttered. When you hear my grenades going off down there, you'd better not be standing above where I throw 'em. Just straddle the sucker and knock on the ceiling before she blows, she said. Martell knocked the bat-wing door apart with one fist, hesitated, and pushed his way back through. Forget it, he said. No way am I going down there. Irene rose up with the dustpan heaped full of ashes and crossed to the trash can beside the prep table. Then at least go back up and drag Willie's drunk ass down here. She dumped the ashes inside it, regarded the dustpan, then set it aside. These suckers stink just as bad as dead as they did alive. I'll let Willie finish. She looked back over to Martell. Gonna stand there all day, Gumby? Get moving. No, he said. He had worked a long shift and was too tired to play her games anymore. I'm the police here, and I go where I tell myself to go. She leaned against the prep table and passed a hand tiredly over her hair, looking old and worn out. Whatever. One of these demons is probably belching up Danny burps even as we speak, so call off the search. Myself, I'm staying my happy ass right here. Yourself can go where you please. Martell squared his shoulders. His authority had been established at last. Fine then. I will now go to Tupper's cruiser and retrieve the box of shotgun shells that I know is in there. He started for the back door, but turned when Irene called to him. Now what? She raised two fingers. Before you risk your life and limb for a box of shotgun shells, you should ask yourself two questions. He sighed. What two questions, Irene? Number one, why not use the front door? My last patrol just now ended at the rear. Walking out the front door would be a blind approach. By coming in at the enemy from the side, I have the advantage of surprise. Next. Number two, she said. If you can make it to the car, why don't you drive over to the lawn to the front steps, open the door, and pick me up so we can get the fuck out of here? He blinked. Good idea. He had tried it once before and almost lost his life to the demons, but now he was better at this survival thing. Was a seasoned veteran, not afraid of webbed claws and bloated faces with long yellow fangs. I'll honk, he said. You stay close till you hear it, then run like hell out the front. She perked up, losing her permanent sneer for a moment. Do you suppose it might work? She asked him. After tonight, this place is going to have a reputation so bad nobody or their dog will ever room here again. And I've got insurance. I could torch it on the way out. Martell made shush-up motions by touching his lips. I'll pretend I didn't hear that, Irene. She went sour again. Once a flat foot, always a flat foot. Just honk when you're ready, Gumby, damn it. He tipped her a wink and went out. The rain had become a permanent fixture and pounded him without mercy as he peered this way and that. The whole world smelled like mud and rain, rain and mud. Crouching, he prowled along the perimeter of the Mission Inn's unattractive backyard, not needing the flashlight because during the last patrol he had committed the layout of the area to memory. Something snagged his foot without warning and tightened around his ankle, jerking him off balance. As he splashed down, he was already kicking at it, a demon hand that peeled his shoe off and went for his other foot. Martel groaned and backpedaled, hearing hisses and grunts amid the pounding of the rain against the ground. He kicked away from the last demon finger and scrambled to his feet, with his breath wheezing furiously in and out. Rather than run, he whipped the flashlight out of its holster while raising the shotgun at the same time. In the uncertain beam, he saw Irene's goddamn garden hose had been haphazardly piled instead of neatly coiled. The brass squirt nozzle was pointing up at the sky. "Cocksucker!" he growled and kicked it. Wrong foot, no shoe. He hopped and danced, cursing. When he was sworn in as a sheriff, his first act, he decided, would be to outlaw uncoiled hosiery. Eventually, he moved on after an unsuccessful search for his shoe. At the side of the building, he paused in a deep crouch, his eyes raking the area, checking the town beyond for lights, of which there were a few. He did not stare directly at these, however, having been taught in the army never to look directly at a light in the night because some kind of stuff inside the eyeballs called visual purple was depleted by light. He rose up, feeling well-trained and crafty. Immediately, he stepped onto something slick, nearly losing his balance again. The aroma of dog shit rose from his remaining shoe. Cursing again, he marched straight for the police cruiser, tired of the whole affair. Clearing a gallon of crumbled glass off the driver's seat, he dropped himself inside. About everything that could be broken was broken. He felt for the keys in the steering column, but they were mysteriously gone. He had been dragged from the car by a monster, of course, but had no memory of pocketing the keys. He felt the seat, looked on the dash, opened the glove box, no keys and no shells. He bent down and touched at the floor. Keys jangled. He smiled and fished them up. The car's key ring held only 2 keys, the ignition and the trunk. The trunk key was there as it should be, but Martel's smile became a frown. The head of the ignition key was there, but the bottom part was broken off. He cranked to the side and peeked into the keyhole. It was occupied. He tried turning the whole switch, but it only moved slightly back and forth. He poked the broken head at it, but no luck. He slumped back against the seat and let his eyes fall shut. The story of his life, from one fuck-up to another. He opened his eyes. Rain was blowing through the shattered windshield. The moon was a lighter spot in the low ceiling of black clouds. What a night, he thought dismally. What a life. "It's a fucking pig, man," someone said in his left ear. He turned with a gasp. A long-haired hippie was crouched beside the car, wearing beads and chains and one of those Tonto headbands. His clothes were tie-dyed, monstrosities of purple and pink and green. A burning marijuana joint was hanging from his lips. His eyes, angry and full of hate, gleamed behind the purple lenses of his granny glasses. "Pig!" he shouted in Martel's face. "Death to the pig!" He stuck a revolver against Martel's nose. It was wet and muddy. It was Martel's own long-lost police special. "4 dead in Idaho," the hippie snarled at him. 10 soldiers and Nixon coming. We're finally on our own." He fired. The back of Martel's head blew apart. Gore slashed across the rear window in a meaty spray. He collapsed across the seat. The hippie jerked Martel's body out of the car and dragged it a few feet away, then stood in the rain, changing, always changing. He tore one of the grenades off the field jacket, stepped past Martel with his feet crunching slowly over the gravel, and got into the car. It started right up. Irene heard it honk. Her eyebrows arched up with surprise. She pushed through that bat-wing door, smelling something in the air but not concerned about it, ignoring everything but the front door and what may lay beyond. As she pulled it open, a small hurricane of wind rushed through. Squinting, she peered into the dark. The police car was right there at the front steps. Her mind suddenly tangled up.
Should she really torch the place? No, of course not. Should she tell Martell just to come back in? We've got to find Danny. Or should she just plain leave and see what developed later? She decided that her hide was of great value. The only cop here was leaving, so why shouldn't she? She pulled the door shut and waddled across the small porch, protecting her eyes from the rain, went down the steps and got into the car, which Martell had conveniently opened for her from the inside. "Better buckle up," he said, when her door had slammed shut. His buttons and badges gleamed softly in the dark. "It could be a crazy ride, Irene." "With you driving, Gumby, I'm sure it will be," she said, and buckled up. Martell, a shape in the blackness, handed her a grenade. "Hold on to this, will ya? There's one last thing I want to check." She accepted it, and he got out. She shook her head. All of creation was out trying to kill anything that moved, and he was ambling away, probably to take a piss on her lawn. She shifted the grenade in her hands, thinking of throwing it out at him just to scare the piss out faster. Something was wrong with it, though. The handle thing was missing. She felt for the pin, and it was gone. "Jesus," she whispered, and dropped the grenade between her thighs. She assaulted the buckle of her seatbelt. It was stuck, even kind of hot, as if it had been welded shut. She furiously cranked her window down and snatched up the grenade, cocked her arm back to throw, but never finished. The exploded remains of the car burned for an hour, despite the rain. By then, the Mission Inn was burning as well, leaving a mystery that would never be solved. Chapter 21. Maybe he was old, and surely he was tired, but Breaker was no fool. As soon as he heard those lightly scampering footsteps tromp down the stairs, he knew that Geraldine was being lured away from him. He got off the bed and slipped to the doorway, his guts tightening, his face hard and determined. Geraldine was just now going down the last few steps, calling to Danny, and Breaker came dangerously close to shouting at her. But he had learned that the best tactic with the salesman was sometimes to stand back and observe. The salesman did not care if Geraldine lived or died, now that he owned the key. It was Breaker's blood that he wanted to see flow, not hers. And so Breaker hung back, edging along the wall, then dropping to crawl on his belly to the top of the stairs. It was a dismal fact that he had no weapons left. All that remained was his mind and his courage, and the decades of experience that had saved him from uncountable scrapes. He craned his head, squinting into the semi-darkness, listening intently. He heard a car honk outside. Breaker frowned. In less than 5 seconds, he saw Irene barge through the batwing doors and hustle down the hallway that led to the front entrance, appearing quite nervous and distraught. He frowned some more. Things had been going on among the others of which he had no knowledge, but it was unavoidable. Martell was a walking recruiter for the Mean Green Machine, and Irene was a bossy space cadet. Together they couldn't do more than sass each other. What they had in mind this time was a riddle that might never be solved. He began to slip down the stairs. Midway down he stopped. Someone had spoken, either Geraldine or Danny. He realized that Irene had passed probably within 20 feet of Geraldine and Danny without seeing, probably thanks to the poor light and Irene's distress. It was nearly comical. This church of the damned had become a maze where people roamed hither and yon without getting anywhere. If Martell and Irene could finally escape, though, more power to them. He would not hold it against them that they had left Geraldine and him here to die. He moved on down to the bottom of the stairway. 2 things happened at once as he crouched behind the post of the handrail. 1, Danny spoke again in a strange voice, and things in that direction began to thump and pound, as if Geraldine was being beaten. 2, a huge thundering explosion shot the entire front door, frame, hinges, and all, through the hallway like a flat missile, while numerous panes of glass at the front of the building shattered and belched, sparkling shards across the floor and carpets. The traveling door smashed the front desk to pieces, wobbled on edge, and keeled over like a dead man. The desk started to burn. Dust clouded the air, making it hard to breathe, impossible to see. Breaker rested his head on the handrail. Martell and Irene had bought the farm in a spectacular way. If Breaker had been creeping past the hallway just then, the amazing flying door would have killed him as well. Strange how fate worked. If he had not been in the same army battalion as Stephen Harrison, he would never have received the key, never have known about it at all. And been dead of old age by now anyway. Go figure the weird workings of the universe. He raised his head and crawled through the dust and rubble, using it as a screen, getting splinters of wood gouged into his hands, and crunching rocks of plaster under his kneecaps. A memory struck. Flanders Field, where poppies now grow, and a barrier of barbed wire he had crawled across in the commotion and terror of a huge battle. All of his comrades in that war were dead now. The rest of this night would determine if he would join them at last. As the haze began to clear under the gusting of wind through shattered windows, Breaker saw that a pack of demons was staggering around, disoriented by the blast and the dust. Little Danny stood over Geraldine, holding her face to the floor with one hand, pressing the back of her neck. He had become mottled and white in the dust. Geraldine's hair and jeans had turned old and gray. Breaker got to his feet and lunged for her, but a vicious, incredibly strong backhand from Danny sent him smashing into the closet where the basement entrance lay. He recovered and crawled out, raking his hands across broken glass, slipping and squirming in the spilled jelly, while a line of blood dropped out his nose and streaks of red and green light stooped across his vision.
I don't know why I do these things,
Danny said, but with a voice that had never belonged to an 8-year-old kid. It was the voice of a demon that had the vocal power to do more than hiss and gobble. He stepped back from Geraldine. She pushed herself up on her hands, shaking and drooling. Danny kicked upward into the middle of her face. It was a terrible blow that lifted her up and off her feet. As she crashed down, Breaker got himself upright. A demon surged up behind him, this one sporting an eye in the middle of its bloated forehead. Breaker turned long enough to jab a finger into that yellow eye. His finger sunk into the last knuckle, and thin white fluid shot across his arm, smoking where it ate through his sleeve. The demon dropped like a large wounded fish. Geraldine staggered to her feet. The Swiss Army knife was still in her fist. Breaker advanced on Danny, who spun and extended his taloned fingers, his mouth stretching wide into a nasty leer. Breaker feigned a simple punch. Geraldine charged up behind Danny and stabbed the fork into the back of his neck. With a grunt, he shambled around in a circle and cuffed her away. She landed on her ass and skidded a few feet.
Bitch!
Danny roared. Breaker jerked the fork out of Danny's neck. 4 lines of blood squirted briefly. Run! Breaker shouted at Geraldine. Danny lurched around. Breaker rammed the fork into his right eye and pulled it out quickly. Hot fluid jetted. The smell of hot varnish welled up in the form of thin black puffs of smoke from the floor. Breaker drew back again, but a huge demon hand clubbed his arm with the force of a sledgehammer. Both the bones inside his forearm snapped wetly, and his arm canted at a grotesque, impossible angle. The Swiss Army knife hit the floor and spun away. The demon clamped its huge webbed paws on Breaker's shoulders and heaved him across the room. He smashed into the remains of the front desk, which were now on fire as well. Geraldine was up again, on her hands and knees now, scrabbling for the knife. She got her fingers around it and rose onto her knees.
You killed my mommy and daddy,
Danny growled, standing in front of her with his ruined eye still pulsing fluid.
Now
His hand snapped out quick as an angry wasp and captured the knife. He tore it from her and held the bloody tines at the tip of her nose. Breaker sat up groggily, parts of his hair smoldering. As he tried to stand, a slat of wood broke under his weight, and he dropped back down, jarring his broken arm. An unwanted scream squirted between his teeth. He moved his hand and felt something different than just wood or chunks of plaster. He picked up the unexpected thing and held it before his eyes. A battered old butterfly knife. His battered old butterfly knife that he had not seen since being frisked by Sheriff Tupper so many nightmares ago. He snapped it open, no novice with a knife, and sighted in on Danny. It was too far to throw accurately, especially for his left arm. "Hey!" he shouted in desperation. "Kid!" Danny's head popped up. Breaker saw Geraldine go for the hand that held the Swiss Army knife and its ridiculous eating utensil. Breaker scuttered forward across the debris, sighting in again, knowing it would never work. Geraldine's hand flashed up. The knife fork was in it. Without any heroics, she poked it almost gently into Danny's other eye. The demon inside Danny Long shrieked. She scurried to the side to avoid the gush of whatever evil thing that had done this to him, to Cordelia, to Uncle Willie. Breaker worked himself back on his feet as Danny dropped to the floor. His broken arm was a crushing vice of pain, but it would get even worse as the shock wore off and his body began to fully understand what had been done to it. Geraldine had risen also and was menacing the demons with the Swiss Army knife. They seemed remarkably tamer. Breaker had long ago guessed that since they were products of the same hell, there was a sort of commonality of mind, like one identical twin feeling the pain of the other, or some such. At this moment, he did not give a damn if the slow, stupid bastards felt better when one or all of them took a well-deserved shit. They were backing off and Geraldine was still alive. He motioned to her. "Come on, quick! We have to get back upstairs!" She loped toward him. Danny's kick had left the imprint of the eyelets and shoelaces of his Nikes on her forehead, and blood was running from both nostrils, but her nose didn't seem broken. Together they scrambled over the rubble, coughing in the rising smoke as the fire steadily spread itself. "No, stop!" she panted, pressing the back of her hand to her nose. "If this place keeps burning, we'll be trapped." "We're trapped anyway," he said, grunting against the pain. He stuck the butterfly knife in a pocket and held his arm to his chest to keep the bones from grating against each other. "The key's gone. Everybody's dead. I fucked up royally this time. You go ahead and run. Run as fast as you can. The salesman doesn't want you anyway." "Nuh-uh, Breaker. Maybe he doesn't want me, but I want him. I hated my life in this dump, but it doesn't mean I hated the people. He killed the only family I had left, maybe the only real one I've ever had. So you go. You run." He put on a bit of a smile. "I don't think so, Engelbert." She matched his expression. "Then it's just you and me, Humperdinck." Now, from ahead, clapping, Breaker and Geraldine looked. "Oh, bravo! Bravo!" the salesman said, walking down the stairs, slapping his hands slowly, steadily. He was wearing a tuxedo and a top hat. His cummerbund was a wonderful red, his thin gloves neat and white. Around his neck hung a small set of opera glasses on a black cord. The battered old case for the key was tucked under his arm. "Even Shakespeare would be weeping now," he said. "Such drama, such heroism, such tragedy, such pathos. I am almost literally in tears. Bravo! Bravo! Bravo!" Geraldine squared her jaw. "You've got what you want, you bastard. Now at least be human enough to let us go." "Human?" He stopped at the bottom of the stairs, tipped back his head and laughed. "Human? Mr. Fracture, would you mind telling this young lady that I do not take kindly to such insults?" "He's not human," Breaker said. He groaned and dropped slowly to his knees, cradling his arm, grimacing. "Run, Geraldine," he rasped. "He only wants me." "Wrong," the salesman blared. "You, Breaker, are history that will soon be forgotten. Our little Geraldine, on the other hand, seems the perfect person to continue the line of robbers and thugs who have kept my key from me so long. In fact, Breaker, I'm in such a good mood at squelching this line of thieves that you may go." Breaker widened his eyes. "You're kidding!" He made sweeping motions with his fingers. "Beat it, before I change my mind, asshole." Breaker found the strength to wobble upright again. He looked at Geraldine, took a long, quavering breath, and crossed in front of her. She watched him with wide eyes. "Silas," she said, "I can't do this alone." He shrugged his shoulders, his face twisted with pain. "I'm old, Jerry. Too old and too tired. Jerry, please forgive me. The salesman wrinkled his nose. Pathetic, isn't it? Geraldine made fists. You bastard, she cried as she limped away. You brought all this death here, and you can just walk away from it? From me? He said nothing. The salesman became interested in the ceiling, tapping his foot impatiently. I hate you, she screamed. I hate you bad. Breaker said nothing. She turned her attention to the salesman. I'll do whatever you want, she said. When I'm cleaned up, I'm a real pretty girl, and I know some tricks that'd even make Cordelia blush. I just don't want to die. Not here. Not now. He eyed her, his mouth twitching at the edges. Whiners! God! He said disgustedly. Want some cheese with that wine, Jerry? She moved toward him, lifting her feet high to avoid being burned by the spreading patches of flame. Drop that knife, he demanded. She let it fall. Breaker was still making his slow, hunchback way to the door. Hold me, she said to the salesman. Please hold me. He put a finger under her chin and smiled at her very fatherly. Sweetheart, you are, by far, the worst actress I have ever seen, he said gently, and moved his hand to clamp around her throat. But I know you have the soul of a warrior, the spirit of 10 men. He hoisted her up. Show me who you really are. I'm a... She could barely push air through her windpipe as he lifted her. A warrior, he said. Tell me that you're a warrior, Geraldine. She was able to shake her head slowly back and forth. I'm a diversion, bastard. The salesman's eyes grew slightly bigger, and his head snapped to her right. In that instant, magically, a small knife punched through his eye and embedded itself into the socket with only the slightest bit of sound, metal grating through bone. The butterfly handle bobbed lazily up and down, clicking. He dropped her and reeled backward. The old key case fell from under his arm and thumped to the floor. She snatched it up as he crashed against the wall. Upstairs! Breaker shouted as he ran toward her. It's the only place we know for sure is sealed. Go! She levered herself dazedly back onto her feet, clutching her throat. She took a step and immediately fell again. The case banged on the floor and jumped from her hand. The salesman jerked the knife out of his eye with a roar of anger and tottered toward the case with both gloved hands tinted an odd orange color by his blood. Breaker dived for it, landed on it, and rolled over with his broken arm flopping in crazy directions. Mine! The salesman roared and slashed out with the knife. Breaker blocked it with the case, nearly losing it as the knife sliced through the old leather, trying to push himself away with his feet while still on his back. The salesman lumbered another step and hacked at him again. This time the shiny blade punched into his stomach just below his ribcage. Breaker gasped. The salesman raked it downward a few inches, then became tangled in Breaker's feet. He fell. Geraldine rose and ran shakily to Breaker. Oh, God! She groaned at the widening oval of blood on his shirt. She helped him get to his feet, and together they stumbled to the staircase. The salesman bellowed indecipherable things, strange words in alien tongues. Geraldine lifted Breaker when he fell, pulled on him when his strength was gone, screamed in his face when his eyes tried to fall shut. Out of weapons, out of time, out of hope. She got him to the landing and dragged him into the room, not even knowing any more if it was sealed or not. But at least she knew they had the key, but she also knew that it was empty. She heard the salesman coming up the stairs.
Chapter 22.
She eased Breaker down on the bed, thinking out of old habit that Irene would kill her for messing up the sheets with all this blood. He lay flat on his back, his broken arm over his chest, his uninjured arm over the gaping slash in his belly. He looked somehow yellow, maybe even green. He seemed to be aging even as she watched, the skin of his face becoming thin and papery, tightening on the bones of his skull. The case was still in his left hand. She pulled it away and flipped the crusty old latches that had been made, she had no doubt, more than 2,000 years ago. Holding the key up to the light, she looked through the foggy quartz of the orb for a sign that enough blood existed inside to seal at least one more door. She shook it, slapped it against her palm. Impossible to tell. A shadow blotted the doorway and she looked over. The salesman stood there, still in high hat and tuxedo. One of his eyes was a crusted slit. The other was large and yellow with a thin pencil point of a pupil that spoke of many deaths, many crimes. "You're going to die, you know," he said. "And Breaker, did I not show you what would happen to Breaker? Look at him now, and know my power." "The only thing powerful about you," she said, advancing to the doorway, "is your breath." She shoved the key at his face, making him lurch backward a step. "Sealed or not sealed," she said, "shall I pull you through to join me?" "Give me the key," he hissed at her. "Give it to me, and I will let you live." She eyed him incredulously. "You are the biggest fucking liar I have ever met," she said. "You say one thing and do the other. You promise things and they never come true." "Of course," he said, touching a gloved finger to his cheek. "That is why I am called the salesman, dear." "Well," she said, twisting the orb open and grinning at him, "from now on let's call you dead meat." She aimed it at his direction and snapped her hand. A few tiny droplets slipped out of the hole in the orb, 2 or 3 of them hitting his face. He squealed and shied away. There was a disappointingly small wisp of smoke here and there, nothing spectacular. "I'll burn you out," he growled. "A key made of iron and quartz don't burn, Jerry, but human flesh sure as hell does." A part of her mind fully expected him to become a bat and fly away. Things were too crazy. Everything was unreal. Instead, he turned and walked to the stairs, muttering to himself like a disgruntled golfer who'd missed an easy putt. He stepped down and walked out of sight. Geraldine turned and slumped against the wall. Breaker had been right. Staying in this room is what they all should have done from the beginning. But now with the fire, even that option was disappearing. "Geraldine!" She raised her head. Somehow he had worked himself up to the headboard and was propped against it, looking worse with each passing moment. She walked to him on legs that felt bloated and weak. Already a small circle of blood was forming on the threadbare carpet as it dripped from the bedspread, with small tapping noises. She sat beside him, not caring about the blood soaking into her jeans. "I scared him off," she said. For now at least." "You're brave," he said. "You're just like me. You spit in the bastard's face and then go someplace alone to wet your pants." She laughed a little, but not much. "Is there anything I can do for your bleeding to slow it down, I mean?" He shook his head. Without warning, a bright line of blood rolled from the corner of his mouth to his chin. "It's time," he said weakly. "You're ready now." She knew, but she did not want to know. He indicated the key in her hand, the stupid, misshapen, king-size key. "Feel it! Feel the key!" She whipped her head back and forth. White dust sifted down. Her farewell memento of mission in plaster. "Look, Breaker," she said softly. "I'm not the right person for this. I'm too wild, too irresponsible, and too young." I was 19, he said. "I didn't want it either. Give me your hand." She frowned. He raised his shattered right arm and held the wrist steady with his left hand. "Your hand," he said again. "Aha," she joked without humor. "Now I get to learn the secret. Keeper of the key handshake, huh?" He groaned. "My arm is killing me, but your jokes are worse." "Take my hand." She took it. It was hot and limp. Sudden pain seared into her palm. Shafts of intense green light dappled the walls. "It's yours now," he said, and she pulled away, wagging her hand to cool it, then looked. The tattoo on his palm had become hers.
"But what does it mean?" she cried out. "What does it mean when the stars move? Yours were in a circle and mine are all scattered around."
"When the stars align again," he said weakly, "it'll be your time to pass the key to someone else. Until then, run, and don't look back."
"So it is true," she said. "You said our destinies were the same. You came here and knew."
"I knew that I'd find you, Geraldine. Knew that my time was up. But still I hope that maybe I could walk away from the job, live a few years as a free man, be a beach bum, putter around in my garden, collect stamps, do all the mundane things people do when they have no reason to be afraid. And most of all, the very best of all, get a decent night's sleep. Just one big hour snooze session." He closed his eyes, coughing, his mouth turned up in a bit of a smile. "To sleep, Geraldine. That would be the best." She nodded slightly and glanced at the doorway.
"As long as that blood still holds," she said, "you can sleep all you want. In the morning, I'll get help. We'll haul your ass to a hospital and then discuss this key business and how to get rid of the damn thing. Melt it down for scrap, tie it to an atomic bomb, whatever. This is the space age, right? We'll nuke that sucker into a big stinking pile of atoms."
She looked down at him. His smile was still in place. One of his eyes was partially open. She touched his eyelash.
"Not now," she whispered. "Please, Silas, not now."
The ghostly drip of his blood onto the carpet faltered and quit. She turned away and dropped her head into her hands. The key clunked against her forehead, and she almost hurled the thing away with a shout of anger and despair. Something heavy shifted downstairs. What it could be, she had no idea. Though her nose was caked with drying blood, the aroma of smoke touched her nostrils sharp and fresh. The noise repeated itself, burning lumber collapsing. The salesman standing on a pile of furniture trying to saw a hole in the floor under her feet, like in a cartoon. She raised her head and looked at the key, gripping it fiercely in both hands.
"I hate you,"
she hissed at it, then checked the position of the orb and pressed it into the thick pool of blood on Breaker's chest. Slowly, as if as reluctant as she was to continue this ongoing game, it began to fill. Now she was crawling across the floor toward the stairway. The smoke upstairs had grown to a dense white fog, cut by ballooning swirls of more ominous colors, browns and blacks and greens. With her lips sucking air a fraction of an inch above the carpet, she was relying on the fire safety methods taught in elementary school to keep her from choking to death. It was working fairly well. At the head of the stairs, she tensed all of her muscles and became a surfboard, riding down the steps on her stomach. At the bottom, she became a snake again, concerned with only one thing: escape. No one was left behind to be saved. The whole world waited for her beyond these burning walls. She had smeared herself heavily with Breaker's dead blood. The instinct made little sense to her, but she had obeyed it anyway. The orb of the key was full to the point of leaking from its primitive seams. The salty stench of blood was a cloud hovering wherever she moved, wherever she breathed, but she welcomed it. Breaker had lived a long, long life before he died, and she was determined never to die young. She crawled to the space where the front desk had once stood. Oddly, perhaps fatefully, the fire in this area had not done much damage before moving on. She cut to the right where the smoke was thinnest, rising up into a troglodyte posture, coughing into her hand. The bathroom, where she had seen the sign so strangely changed to include ghouls, still advertised its employees' only message. She pushed the door open and found the room free of smoke. With a grateful breath, she raised up to her full height. The mirror above the sink caught her eye. A woman made of smeary blood and wild gray hair looked back at her. To her left was the bathtub. To her right, the toilet. Above it was a small window with a pane of bumpy green glass. Could she fit through it? She knew now that she could do all manner of extraordinary things. She was standing on the toilet when the door crashed open so hard the upper hinge broke in two, and the whole door bent to the floor. The salesman tromped over it and laughed at her. For this newest occasion, he had manufactured himself a fireman's rubberized coat and pants and a shiny yellow fireman's hat with a long plastic bill in the front and a long plastic bill in the back. He lifted a big white bullhorn to his lips and brayed madly into it.
May I have your attention, please? The premises are on fire. Repeat, the premises are on fire. Everyone on the premises is directed to panic. Panic and scream now.
She dug her fingernails under the metal frame of the window and tried to pull it open. Flakes of rust sifted down. She stabbed at the pane with the key, but it only ricocheted off. The glass had a wire mesh embedded inside. "Give us a hug," the salesman bawled and put his arms around her waist. Immediately he screamed and jumped away, flapping his hands, slapping at his smoking costume. "You slut!" he shouted. "You bloody, bleeding slut!" He lurched to the bathtub and ripped the shower curtain down with one tremendous yank. Geraldine whipped her head to the left, to the right. To the right was only a blank wall made of little blue ceramic tiles that had split and cracked under the weight of years. To her left, the open doorway where thin drifts of smoke ambled past. She thrust the key out, menaced him with it, knowing that if a camera crew burst in and saw her carefully tiptoeing back and forth on the creaking lid of the toilet like this, she would have to demand that her face be computerized out when it was televised. The salesman bundled the top and bottom of the shower curtain in his fist to form a parachute of sorts. He whipped it over Geraldine's head with all the ease of a cowpoke snagging a doggy, and jerked her off balance. She slammed down on the toilet. Her teeth clicked together on the tip of her tongue, and she tasted blood. More blood. It seemed the night was filled with blood. He twisted her inside the curtain and manhandled her to the bathtub. Her calves connected with old, cold porcelain, and she fell backwards into the tub. He cranked the water on. The crusty old shower head was filled with flakes of lime and debris, but cold water shot out all the same. "First we wash the blood off, Geraldine," he sang out. "And then we empty the key out is what we will do," he continued. He took her hand that held the key and maneuvered her fingers across the sides of the orb, forcing it open. Fresh crimson blood seeped out. "No!" Geraldine screamed, furiously kicking and fighting him. She dragged her captive hand downward and bit into his fingers. He hollered and his grip loosened momentarily. She thought of Breaker, what Silas Breaker would do right now. How he had lived so long on the run with only his stamina and his wits to keep him a step away from surrendering the key. "Damn you!" the salesman growled. Water dripped from his hat as he battled her. "Why don't you people ever just give up?" She bit his fingers again. He roared. Knowledge, a hint of something that could not have come from her own mind, blossomed tentatively inside her brain. There was a way out of this. There was a way so simple the salesman would never dream of it, because the salesman only thought in terms of what he wanted, and the men and women who had dodged him for 2,000 years thought in terms of how much he should have to pay. It was a price he would never accept, total surrender. She mashed her lips to the orb and sucked a huge mouthful of Breaker's warm blood into her mouth, and clamped her teeth and lips over the secret. She quit struggling. Grunting as he worked, the salesman used her hand to shield himself from the power of the living key. When he had cleaned it under the spray of water, he tore it out of her hand and let her fall away. He held it up high, beaming with pleasure and pride. "This is like totally cool, Geraldine," he said. This is like the best day ever." He grabbed her by the wrist and dragged her out of the tub. "We're talking major career move here, Jerry. I don't want you to feel bad for losing the key, though, okay? Here, follow me. He hauled her along as he left the restroom. The broken door scraped painfully under her back. Where the smoke grew thick enough to sting her eyes, she was finally able to stand. Chuckling, whooping with joy, the salesman told her through the gaping blowhole that had been the front entrance out across the destruction that had been a porch and a car, and under the foggy black sky.
Finally!
He roared at the sky.
10,000 blind alleys, 1,000,000 miles on the road, jerks and idiots and assholes galore, but now it is mine.
He eyed Geraldine, panting.
Party time,
he said. Mind if I slip into something that is, more after my own style? He raised his hands to the sky. A flash of lightning popped out of the clouds and touched him. For a moment he was engulfed in powdery blue flame. Then chunks of his body split and began to fall away like husks. Geraldine staggered backward a step. Underneath his many sets of clothes, underneath his very skin, was a being of ugly, boiling orange light. This new thing stepped closer to her.
Tell me now,
he said, and yep, it was the trusty old voice of the salesman.
Looking at me like this, don't you get a little hot? Come on now. Right, Geraldine? Looking at me like this, getting you a little hot?
She offered him a toothful grin. Blood leaked between her teeth. His expression went from sheer glee to sheer horror. She garbled, and with every bit of her strength spit all of Breaker's blood in his face. It would have been disappointing, she later reflected, if he had simply melted like the Wicked Witch. It would have been disappointing if he had exploded like an overloaded boiler. It would have been disappointing if he had burst apart into 100 little demons with squeaky voices that bumbled about in terror and then ran away. Instead of those options, he chose the one most suiting his personality. The one that told her without a doubt that he would be back soon and that he would be looking for her. He rolled up like a cheap window shade. The key dropped into the mud. Distantly, a touch of orange streaked across the sky. A nomad asteroid, she supposed, or the salesman going back to the center of the cosmos to regroup and make new plans. Or, she thought with a smile, it was Breaker's soul, free at last, free to live, free to love, free to sleep, from now until forever.
Epilogue.
4 days later, Terre Haute, Indiana. The bus station just off Wabash Avenue was a joke. The hard little seats of the waiting area scratched and gouged and were uncomfortable. Geraldine had been waiting for the next connecting bus for longer than anyone should have to wait. She checked her watch and opened the bus schedule in her hand. She had an aunt in Virginia who would let her stay in her home until she got back on her feet. It wasn't much of an offer, but the best Geraldine could drum up. The bus was late. New Mexico was hot, but at least there it was a dry kind of heat. Here, in the armpit of Indiana, it was like living in a sauna. Virginia weather was probably the same, so she told herself she had better get used to it. More minutes passed. Geraldine thought of the past, thought of the future. Before leaving the burning Mission Inn, she had refilled the orb with Breaker's cold, jellied blood. It was the hardest thing she had ever been forced to do, but there had been no choice. You either does it, she knew, or you doesn't, and so she did. Now she stood restless, trying to shove the memories from her mind, and wandered over to the dirty little water fountain around the corner from the empty gumball machine again, for lack of anything else to do. Warm chlorine mixed with a trace of water squirted feebly out, and she bathed her tongue with it, not daring to swallow and be dead soon. Something hard and small rammed into her spine from behind. She jerked upright and whirled, 1,000 dreadful thoughts zipping through her mind. But it was only a big ugly bastard with a lot of acne scars on his greasy face.
"Give me your purse," he rasped. "Don't get brave and scream or nothing. Just give me the purse."
"I'm not carrying a purse," she said.
"Then money. Give me your money."
"All I've got is a couple bucks." He looked her over.
"You know you ain't the ugliest broad I've ever seen. Go into the bathroom and keep your mouth shut, 'cause I'm right behind you."
Geraldine closed her eyes, weary of this. "Hey, Big Shot," she said, "you're right about that." He raised his eyebrows.
Right about what?
"I ain't the ugliest broad you've ever seen, but I'm the last broad you're ever going to see." He frowned.
Huh?
She grabbed the back of his head and smashed his face against the steel rim of the water fountain. "Peekaboo," she said, raising him, and gouged his eyes out with 2 fingers of the same hand, the old Three Stooges style. He spasmed backward and rolled on the floor, pawing at his face and bellowing. She patted her pocket before moving on. The key was there. A smoking old wreck of a bus was now idling in the rectangle of shade behind the depot. She checked her ticket, checked the number of the bus, and stepped up. As she showed her ticket, someone stepped up behind her, crowding her forward. She turned instinctively, hauling the key halfway out of her pocket before she even realized she had done it. The man was a black, well-dressed business type. He glanced down at her hand, glanced in her eyes, and stepped back down to the ground. "That's okay. I'll catch the next one," he said, and though it may have been the hazy Midwestern sun, may have been a trick of the glare through the windows of the bus, his eyes seemed to glow inside, a subdued bestial red that shone in his eyes before he turned away. Geraldine found an empty seat. A teenage boy in the seat ahead glanced back at her, turned back to his business, then glanced again. "Wow," he said. "Neat tattoo." Geraldine curled her hand. "Thanks." "No, really, I'd like one just like that. I love astrology stuff. I'd love to get one when I'm older. How much did it cost you?" She smiled at his innocence. "It cost me a lot," she said. "It cost me more than you could ever know." He scowled at her, disbelieving, and turned away, and got involved in other things, which was just fine with Geraldine. As the bus drove away, the man who had decided to catch a later bus began whistling a tune. Author's Final Interlude by T.C. Keeper. "Okay, kiddies, that's about the size of it. I just faxed a copy of the manuscript to a team of top-notch editors at Pocket Books in New York. I've heard they get off on slashing things here and there, hacking out big chunks, tearing writers' hearts out. Who better to understand me? And I figure that since Pocket has a kangaroo for a logo, they'll get things hopping. While I wait for a reply, here's an update. Wormwood is of course a ghost town now, and will be forever. The Mission Inn burned to the ground, leaving only unanswered questions for the authorities of New Mexico. They found 9 charbroiled skeletons, but could only identify 8. Wanda, Cordelia, Sheriff Tupper, Deputy Martell, Uncle Willie, Roach, Wally Enfield, and Danny Long. The 9th one, that of Silas Breaker, had the coroner mystified. The bones, he said at the inquest, were those of a man almost 100 years old. No one could imagine who it might have been. The remains of Silas Breaker were quietly buried in a pauper's grave in Junction City, which was marked only with a small cement cross. Several years later, the caretaker found an old military medal hanging from it by a faded purple ribbon. He checked the library and found that it was a meritorious service medal from World War I. Rather than pawn it or sell it, he tucked it into his wallet, and on every Memorial Day since has draped it there again. In the meantime, Geraldine Bascom wanders from town to town, job to job, hiding from the law and the inevitable appearance of the next salesman. She does not know when the stars on her palm will shift again, but she knows they will, and on that day she will face Breaker's fate as bravely as he did. Wait, the fax is beeping. Something's humming. Now a sheet of paper is slowly reeling out. It says, To T.C. Keeper, from the editors at Pocket Books. Dear Mr. Keeper, the only way you will publish this ghastly book is over our dead bodies. The only way it will become a movie is if you kill every producer and director in Hollywood.
Okay, boils and ghouls, I think that could be arranged, don't you? See you at the movies, kiddies!
Okay, Slashaholics, this has been Tales from the Crypt, Demon Night, the novelization of the movie by Randall Boyll. I gotta say, what I love about this book is it's so different from the movie. I can tell that this book was based off a really early script for the movie. So many things got changed before they filmed. Probably some of the things got changed while they were filming due to budget. But I have done an in-depth discussion on this book. If you're interested in it, check out the playlist for this book that has all the individual uploads of like 1 to 2 to 3 chapters at a time. At the end of each of those, I do a discussion of the chapters I had just read in that upload and the book up to that point. So I'm not going to sit here and redo the whole thing, but I will make a few points that I really enjoyed about the book, and I hope you enjoyed it too. It was weird having Geraldine be totally different than in the movie, but at the same time it was kind of refreshing. It's like a different take on it. The salesman seemed just as charismatic as ever, though Billy Zane really brought that character to life, and there was no way that I was going to be able to come even close to what Billy Zane did, but I hope it was still fun. I tried to give it all I had when it came to the salesman and have fun with it. I really enjoyed the Crypt Keeper parts of the book where it cut back to him like he was the author of the book. I think what Randall did there was pretty cool. Really enjoyed that. The demons seemed a lot more scary and terrifying and menacing in this book. A lot more monstrous than in the movie for sure. I've discussed this in some of my other end upload commentaries in the individual uploads. I thought the roach scene, being different from the movie, the way he died, was better than what happened in the movie, but the Uncle Willie one just wasn't as good. It was still funny and fun, but the whole thing with Billy Zane and the cigar and Hawaiian shirt and all that in the movie, far better. I really did not enjoy how Martell and Irene died in the book. I thought it was kind of cool to see the salesman completely take the form of one of the people, since Martell was dead. It was just weird having the salesman shoot him in the head with a gun. That just threw me off a little bit. I really enjoy the movie. You know how Irene gets her arm cut off in the movie, and whenever the salesman's making his pitches, she sticks her stump up, and he's like, "Oh, is that you wanting to shake my hand?" She's like, "No, that's me giving you the finger." I was missing that from the book, and that camaraderie between Irene and Martell when the demons are encircling them and coming in on them to kill them, and they pull those grenades that they found of Wally's and just blow them all to hell. We didn't get the scene with Roach and Cordelia and the jumper cables. We got a mention of it, but we didn't get the scene. But I could sit here and go on about what we didn't get in the book that we had in the movie. But that's the thing. Novelizations are going to be different because they're based on scripts before a movie starts shooting, 99% of the time. And this is always going to be a favorite book of mine, one of my at least top 20, just because I love the movie so much, and it's really cool to have this alternate take on the story. Now that I've read the book, this was my first time reading it, it's really cool to have two different versions of Demon Knight to turn to anytime I want to. I enjoyed both of them immensely. I loved the scenes with Breaker and Geraldine here at the end. Really felt that connection between them. It's weird that Geraldine's a minor. I really didn't get that from the movie, but it is what it is. Breaker was 19 whenever he became, the protector of the key. So maybe he still did have that mentality even 97 years later. I don't know. That's what the book tried to tell us anyways. I really enjoyed the epilogue. It was pretty much what the movie was, except we got a scene where Geraldine kicks a would-be mugger's ass and kills him. I guess she's really going for the eyes on everything now, just in case. Took out his eyes while she was killing him. I gotta say the best death in the book would be Roach's, the way he got squished like a roach. It was very fitting for him. Danny was pretty creepy in the book, a lot more creepier than in the movie. He didn't get turned with the comic book. We never really got to see how he got turned. But that whole scene with him and Geraldine and Breaker getting his arm broke, that was pretty intense. I did enjoy the final scenes we had between Geraldine and the salesman. We had the whole shower curtain thing, washing her, dumping out the blood, her putting the blood in her mouth, and that played out a lot like the movie, but we didn't get the whole energy coming out of Billy Zane's crotch like a supernatural boner or whatever that was supposed to be in the movie. We didn't get the funny, Geraldine, I love you. Is there any way you could ever love me? The ending was kind of sucked the wind out of my sails a little bit on that, because I was expecting a bigger ending. But it is kind of funny that in the book, instead of blowing up or whatever, he just rolls up like a curtain. Totally fits the character of the salesman. So yeah, I'm okay with that, I guess. But yeah, if you want to hear even more details, check out the playlist for the book. I did upload discussions for each of the 1 to 3 chapter uploads, and I was very detailed on those because this is my favorite movie of the 90s, like my favorite non-slasher horror movie. So yeah, if you want to hear more of what I think on this book, check out the playlist, skip to the end of each upload, and you'll hear what I had to say about each 1 to 3 chapter section of the book. Also, at some point, I'll be covering this book on Out of Print Slashers podcast, and you can bet I'm going to go into a lot of details on there too. Alright, thank you so much for listening to my audiobook of Tales from the Crypt Demon Night. I really enjoyed it, and I hope you did too. Check back often. I'm going to keep pumping out more and more out-of-print slasher horror movie novelizations, tie-in books here. There's always going to be a lot of stuff coming out of the 80s Slasher Library. This has been your friendly neighborhood 80s Slasher Librarian saying, thanks for listening. Pleasant dreams. And I'll see you real soon.